So good morning and welcome to the premier Breakfast Club of the Desert. Really happy today to have Kim Furst. We have tremendous speakers that come here. Kim is really special. I'm going to say a little bit about her and just barely graze the surface. She's been a studio executive, an independent producer, director. She's a documentary film editor. Since 2003, she's been known for editing work within the aviation film industry. And some of the things she's been credited with are Discovery Channel's Rocket Challenge, a film I think many of us are familiar with, 1-6 Wright, Wings Over the Rockies, and The Horseman Cometh. She also spent 3 years as an executive overseeing the making of documentaries for big budget studios as well, such as Mission Impossible 3. Just to point out, she's done 5 aviation documentaries. And in our small world, this makes her about as large as you can get for filming. So with that, I'd like to welcome Kim, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Great. Am I loaded? Is this working? Okay. Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Thank you all for having me here. Is the volume loud enough for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's okay? Good. Terrific. Thank you. So it's an incredible honor to be standing in front of all of you. Patrick had invited me to a meeting, actually. It was probably maybe 4 meetings ago, and I got an opportunity to be here, which was great for me. You hear a little bit of what I've done as a filmmaker, and I'm really interested in aviation stories. And there's probably about 70 of them in this room. And so I was looking for a documentary that I could sink my teeth into. One of the things I became known as is a film editor. I'm the one that inherits. That sounds like it just went off.
Put your arm out. Oh, good.
Change. Okay. All right. That's fine, because this was really pulling my shirt down on the side, and I didn't really think that was added entertainment that I needed.
Apparently you don't know the crowd here.
Well, this is true. Now, let's see. Technical, one moment. Started to try to take this tail off, and now I'm stuck with it. You didn't know you'd watch me get dressed here. Sorry. Okay, so where was I? I was talking about, as a film editor, what I do, what I've done, and why I'm even here, and why I did the Hoover movie. So in my career as a film editor doing documentaries, had directed a whole bunch of other things, but with aviation, I usually work on projects like Rocket Challenge, the Discovery Channel thing. Rocket Challenge was a neat project. It was really my first one within aviation. And with these guys were JPL guys and guys who are actual, rocket scientists. And on the weekends, they built these enormous kit rockets, and they would go clear the airspace once a year. Did anyone ever hear of this group, LDRS? Large Dangerous Rocket Ships? You have, yeah. It's a neat group. So, they're mixing propellant in their garage, and they do these huge kit rockets, like 30 feet, and then they clear the airspace to like 30,000 feet, and they once a year all get together and have, and just launch them, and have like closest to point, distance and all these different requirements for like winning these different awards with LDRS. So usually with that kind of thing, you've got 5 guys running around a 3-day event, and they'd collect about 500 hours of footage, or I'm exaggerating it, probably 200-300 hours. So as a film editor, I inherit all that, and I try to make a story out of it. I do, it's called a 3-part structure. You begin somewhere, you have a middle, and then you end, and you gotta introduce everybody. So that's what, I do with aviation documentaries. I stick my elbows in, I do a whole bunch of research, and then I make a story out of it. And after doing that for many, many, many years for many, many different people, I decided, I want to produce and direct and edit and write my first feature documentary solo. And I was looking for that subject that could capture my attention for a while. And my dear friend, Sean Tucker, who I was fortunate to meet through some of my other projects. I've had some very lucky experiences within aviation. And he said, Kim, I want to introduce you to somebody that I really look up to. And I knew of Bob Hoover because he had been in 16 Wright, so I had seen his interview for 16 Wright. But in 16 Wright, we were talking to him about Van Nuys Airport. You know, we weren't talking to Bob Hoover about Bob Hoover. So I didn't know Bob Hoover. I thought I knew Bob Hoover because I knew he flew in air shows, and I knew he had a hat, and I knew he was really a nice guy, and he was a humble man and just a patriot, and I knew lots of great things about Bob Hoover, but I didn't know Bob's story. So Sean took me to this dinner. It was like Bob lives in Palos Verdes. By the way, Bob's very sorry he couldn't be here today. He lives in Palos Verdes, but this is a 2-hour hike for him in the morning, and it just, he would have had to leave for 5 in the morning, and it's just not he likes to get up at a gentlemanly hour. And at 93, he's still going to Reno in a couple weeks, so he just went to Oshkosh. So still getting around, but I know he would have liked to have stood here in front of all you and chatted with you, so I'm very sorry that he's not here and you're stuck with me. But I'll talk about him. So when I went to this dinner, we started in Bob's bar downstairs. How many of you know Bob personally? He's probably got real friends in the room. Howard? Anyone else friends with Bob? Have you been to his I Love Me room downstairs? No. Bob's bar it's what you would picture Bob's bar would be. I mean, it's lined with photos of everybody. We've got Neil Armstrong and Yeager and test pilots, and it just goes on and on. It's pretty unbelievable. The whole side window of his house is glass. He's way up in Palos Verdes on a hill, just where you think Bob Hoover should live. He looks down on everything, just like he's up in the air. And looks down on LAX, Torrance Airport. And we started there, and then after drinks, about 9 of us went to dinner. And by the end of that night, I mean, everybody else was test pilots, other significant people in aviation. I've got about 30 hours on my private, and I haven't soloed yet, so I just felt really lucky to be there. By the time I was done, I knew this was going to be a great documentary. It was my goal to preserve it for the future generations that might not have ever seen him fly. Who's seen him? Who's seen him fly? Yeah. Did anyone serve with him, or has anyone been in the Air Guard and saw him fly in a military capacity? His demonstrations in the F-86 or the F-100? Okay. Yeah, Howard. Okay. So, all right. Well, I have a whole bunch of clips to share with you, which will be fun. Does anyone not know who Bob Hoover is? I just didn't even introduce him because I figure everything I'm going to say here is going to give you a good grounding on who Bob Hoover is. But as you know, he's been a top experimental test pilot, World War II pilot, top premier airshow pilot for about 6 decades or something like this. He actually is one of the recipients of the Wright Trophy. He has a honorary graduate from both the Air Force and the Navy test pilot schools. And at Maxwell, they've actually given him, Air University has given him an honorary doctorate as well, which is the intellectual and leadership heart of the Air Force, as many of you know. Jimmy Doolittle, I heard someone saying the quote earlier, named him the greatest stick and rudder that ever lived. And he's got a staggering list of accomplishments, but to the general public, most people know him as an airshow performer. Some of you know more, but I will share this first clip with you that will orient you a bit if you know a little bit about Bob Hoover, if you want to know a bit more. I think when I started this film, I wanted to pull the string on, I could do a documentary about, oh yeah, Bob's great, he's really, really great. Isn't he great? He's awesome. We all agree he's great. But he has a unique skill set. And this, I think this is the clip that talks about energy management. But I wanted to get into his history and figure out if I could almost build a case for where that skill set, what's it rooted in? Where did it come from? And you know, you got a guy who just arrives and he's got the touch, or did he have was it that, but he has a set of circumstances that actually helped him develop those skills? So, without ado, and this is, if anyone can't hear this, raise your hand, and I'm going to wave at this gentleman in the back, and maybe you can raise it up for them in case it's too low. Okay.
Nothing equals either combat or experimental flying. And it's something about risk-taking that you don't think anything's going to ever happen to you. It just only happens to other people. You're like to think that I'm smarter than the airplane is, and I'll know how to handle whatever situation comes my way. That isn't always the case. If you have a malfunction at the wrong place at the wrong time, you're dead.
Okay, you're observing the entry to a spin test. And the objective was to decrease the airspeed at the rate of 1 knot per second until the airplane was fully stalled, at which time the controls had to be placed in the cross-control position. Full right rudder and full left aileron with the stick pulled back. As you can see, the airplane developed into a flat spin initially. The sensation within the cockpit is one of spinning about an axis ahead of the airplane. Though that's not really the case, as you can see here. The smoke that you've just observed are the rockets that are used to try and stop the rotation. Now you're seeing the drag chute, or spin recovery chute, which was totally ineffective, as well as the rockets. The spin continued for 22 consecutive turns with different control applications, as well as the recovery techniques described. And approximately 10,000 feet above the terrain, I ejected, and you can see the parachute blossom up there.
And you got to be prepared for that split-second judgment that is necessary to stay alive. And so has it been with the air show work. There were many times that I just played lucky, because whatever happened, happened at exactly the right place in the right time. I had to have the right circumstances to have survived. Sometimes you do have the right circumstances, and sometimes you don't.
Malfunction here was a bolt had fallen out on the left wheel. Gear was frozen in air position. I had to let half the runway foam down so that I could keep the right wheel on the dry surface for braking purposes. And the intent was to land it as slow as possible. There's the power going off. You can see the blades begin to change their speed. You can see that there's heavy braking going on because the tail is still in the air, even though the wing's down. And at that point, of course, I couldn't hold any longer.
That's one of the lectures I give to the graduating classes of the test pilot school. Think outside of the box. You've learned everything you can learn in school. But remember, when lightning strikes, you never know where it's going to hit. Think outside of the box.
What were you thinking about making that last approach?
Well, only about as little damage as possible to my great little airplane.
Did you really never think about the damage that might happen to you?
Well, I've been a test pilot all my life, and you don't dwell on those thoughts.
Was this the closest call you've had in a long time, or what?
No, not really.
So this search for what was essential about the life and flying career of Bob Hoover, and putting it together in a way that maybe it might say something to a future generation, or I might preserve it in a way that might inspire other generations moving forward. How can I put something about what his career meant for all of us in a time capsule? And how many of you have flown the F-100? Any F-100 pilots in here? Yes, sir. Did you ever flat spin it like that?
No, not intentionally.
Not intentionally. Did you flat spin it unintentionally?
Single turn.
A seal turn, like one of the S,
Single.
a single turn, and you got it out with the, did Did you kick in the afterburner, or were they teaching you recovery from it? Yeah. Tough to get, this particular one, he was doing this flat spin testing because they were having troubles with the F-100, obviously. And it was, a 22 rotation flat spin just because of the small vertical tail. Before they started to make some modifications, they were getting people stuck in the flat spin. So anyhow, how many people fly the P-51? Anyone flown a P-51?
Dad made them.
Your dad made them? Think a lot of people have landed on one wheel? Yeah. So it's just a little bit of a look at, okay, so we've got a guy who has had some experiences. So here's our next clip.
We want to see another Bob Hoover. Bob has spanned generations of pilots. He's been everything from military to test to business to air show, a good businessman himself. You're not likely to find anyone who can fill all those categories again. And so importantly, he's been sent all over the world by our State Department, by the military, to specifically perform at air shows, interact with other countries and other pilots, and it's unlikely you'll find anyone with all of those skills again.
This is the Rockwell Flight Commander, an airplane that was not designed for aerobatics. It was designed as a business pleasure aircraft, seating 7 people. And here you're observing an 8-point roll. And this is being accomplished with both engines feathered, and you're stopped, and you'll see the propeller standing streamlined into the wind, or feathered.
For the crowd, Bob adds a touch of humor with what he calls his Tennessee waltz maneuver. With landing gear and flaps down, he makes an approach known to pilots as a falling leap side slip. This sort of thing is usually done only in fighter planes.
Well, there's a lot of swagger out among the fighter pilot community, and a lot of people claim to be the world's greatest fighter pilot. They have on their name tag, Joe Blow, WGFP. Well, Bob Hoover was the world's greatest fighter pilot.
Bob is famous for his demonstrations of conserving energy in an airplane with the engines shut down purposefully. Flight maneuvers in which he creates airspeed and translates that into altitude and then continues to manipulate those 2 factors.
By energy management, I mean you're pulling the airplane up and you want it to go over the top like this. He knows just when that moment is so it doesn't stall and come back down like this. And he can get on the ragged edge better than anyone that I've ever seen.
He was a god to a lot of us younger fighter pilots. He did so much for the flying game in general, the Air Force in particular, that he's looked on as a god.
Well, the lessons that I took from him, and also the lessons that the nation took from him, and this is really important. Energy management is the secret to aerial combat. The pilot who can maintain his energy level, in other words, speed usually, at the higher level is probably going to win. And so how do you do that? And that was what he was working on that back in the 40s. Well, now Top Gun and the Fighter Weapons School and all these things that have come recently train pilots to think like that.
And love to pick Bob Hoover's brains about what he did as a test pilot. And I tell you, some of his stories, you know, you could make a documentary of Bob Hoover that would last for a lifetime and still not hear all the stories.
And along with that, he was a great personality. You could sit down and have as good a time with Bob Hoover at a lunch and 2 or 3 martinis and then go back to work and do some serious good stuff. And he just was the all-American boy. You know, his story is in itself just an absolutely epic story.
Nobody's ever done what Hoover's done in an airplane.
everyone hearing that okay? Volume?
Yes.
Good? Okay. So most knew him as an air show performer. And this thing that they touched on with the energy management and the Shrike, many of you may recognize, of course, the typical Southern gentleman, the straw hat, the yellow P-51, and also the routine he would do in the Shrike. So in his 70-year career, one of the things that this engines off routine, where he would shut off one engine, then shut off the other, and do a series of graceful loops and rolls, this concept of energy management, it actually hasn't ever been duplicated. It is a tough routine. I've heard Bob talk about, there was another aviator who, they had a Shrike just like his, and they were going to do it at Oshkosh one year, and they were picking Bob's brain about it, and he was just saying, you know, he really was encouraging them not to do the routine, and the main reason was that it's trickier than it looks. How many of you have flown a twin engine on one engine? Yeah. What do you think about it? Not much margin, you know. Was it by necessity, or have you all done it in your training, or necessity? Both. So this interesting, when I was researching Bob, one of the things I found interesting was when Bob was in World War II, he had a very interesting part of his career that only through digging in and digging around and finding out a little bit about his background. The first thing he did when he was in World War II was actually he worked in a depot. After he flew with the British, and he actually had early on proven himself as incredibly capable. He was impressing his seniors, and he was put in charge of 68 pilots when they went over as a very young man. I think he was 20 years old. But his first assignment was actually in a depot. So what did he have to do? He had to ring out P-38s. And what did he have to do while he was ringing out a P-38? He had to test it. He had to turn off an engine, turn off another engine. And I'm going to show you a clip now that's a little bit about his depot flying. But just to understand what it means to take an aircraft like that and basically turn it into a glider and play around with it. This is just a little joke. Of course, Bob Hoover was born in 1922, and sliced bread was first manufactured in 1928. Of course, you've all heard this one. Sliced bread, the greatest thing since Bob Hoover. So looking at the fundamentals of this skill set, that's just really unique. Let's take a little look at Bob's early training experiences.
The person I reported to at headquarters in Iran, one of the first places we invaded in North Africa. When I checked in with these 67 pilots, they put us in tents. And boy, it was very primitive. I mean, it was really down to the basics. Some major came to me and he said, "We've got an assignment for you." And I said, "Well, where am I going? Which fighter group am I going to?" He said, "You aren't. You're going to be assigned to a depot." And I thought to myself, what is a depot? And a depot is where they repair battle-damaged airplanes, or in this case, assembled airplanes, because we were bringing fighters overseas in crates on ships. And my assignment, which was distressful to me because I wanted combat, is to fly those airplanes after they were assembled. It was almost an impossible situation. Shipload after shipload. The Arabs were doing the assembly work, and only a handful of inspectors. The language barrier, one accident right after the other, because of mistakes that these people would make in putting the airplanes together. And you could inspect them all you wanted to, but you can't see the guts of the airplane unless you have it naked, taking all the cowlings off and look at every little detail. Gear failures were frequently a problem, and that would end up having to belly the airplane in And a lot of people think, oh, that's very difficult. Well, it became routine because I had so many gear failures. I had so many engine failures. Every 2 or 3 days I'd have an engine failure. And we had to demonstrate those airplanes as if they were going into combat. You had to fire the guns and drop the bombs if that was the case.
And there's something that's unsaid here in this story of Bob Hoover and flying freshly assembled airplanes. He wasn't just doing 1 or 2 a day. I can imagine he was doing 10 or 12 or 15 a day. That's how fast they needed airplanes. They didn't know how to read plans, and then they just could be shown, okay, put this bolt in there and connect up this fuel line, and here's how the flight controls worked and things like that. And so you're almost built in to have a certain number of failures.
The freedom he had to just do what he wanted to do with them too. He'd test them and make sure the airplanes were okay, but then he could spend 15 minutes or whatever doing what he wanted to do. Like for instance, he got where he could do loops and then with a target on the ground and shoot the target every time he came around the loop and hit the target. And that's not easy to do because normally when you do a loop, you kind of go like this. You go forward because you're going faster down here and slower up here. So to make it round, you have to fly longer up here and then come around.
That experience of Bob's working on depot airplanes probably helped him a great deal to prepare himself for his later career as a test pilot, even though the one thing that he really wanted to do was fly combat missions.
So, as you all know what happened, he did end up flying combat missions on his 68th mission. He was shot down over the Mediterranean Sea there and did end up in Stalag Luft 1. But I just brought this up because I found it very interesting. And one of the things when you're trying to make a movie is you're trying to figure out, one of the hardest things to do is to come up with a title. And what is this thing about? You kind of hang it all up on this thesis. It's like writing a paper or a book or anything. So this P-38 Lightning and these early engines off demonstrations and what Bob did, what was it that Bob did that was, so much that Bob did. That's the problem is that, I'll tell you a little anecdote, just here's a good place to tell it. The first day I went to meet with Bob, and I'm an interviewer. I mean, I sit there and I'd read his book, which is, how many people have read his book? Yeah, it's a terrific book. If you haven't read Forever Flying, it's full of stories. And I had read the book, I had my questions, and I was all ready. We had my great camera crew, and day one we sat there and I was ready to interview Bob Hoover. And by the end of the day, we had just gotten through his experiences in World War II. And I thought, well, okay, we'll set up another interview. The next time we got together, we got through his experiences at Wright-Patt. We hadn't touched on North American aviation, Reno, airshow flying. I mean, it's just, it was a 12-and-a-half-hour principal interview. So just looking to structure it and what is it about, that's kind of when I hit on Flying the Feathered Edge. When you get a chance to see the movie, you'll understand the title a bit better. But there was just looking for what was it that Bob does. And there was one of the gentlemen I interviewed who said, Bob flies the feathered edge, and of the, clearly of the flight envelope. And I thought that had a nice ring to it. So he had his escape from Stalag Luft 1. I mean, I think this is one of the things that most people know about Bob. Does everyone know about his escape from Stalag Luft 1? Stole a Focke-Wulf 190. It was the waning days of the war, but things were loosening up. The Russians were coming in. Bob got out, and he made many, many escape attempts. But this one, he broke out with 3 other guys, got to a field nearby where they had. He was looking for an aircraft that could fly, and he found a Focke-Wulf 190 and flew to freedom in Holland. So that's the stuff that legends are made of. So when he got back, because of his experiences in World War II, and I think because of some of the people he met who knew about his flying skills, he got a coveted position at Wright-Patt as a test pilot after the war, flying the captured German and Japanese aircraft. And he was part of that incredible time period, as you know, and I'll share this next clip with you about his time at Wright-Patt.
Right after the war, I wanted to go to Wright-Patt. field because that's where all the research flying for the Air Force was taking place. And the first thing I did was go to the Air Force Test Pilot School. At that time, we were flying 30 or so airplanes in 1 month's time. And a lot of research airplanes that we had not put into production. The average service pilot would never have seen some of these airplanes. They were one or two of a kind. We already knew all of the capabilities of the captured airplanes we flew, but the one that tweaks most people's interest is the Heinkel 162. That was a jet fighter built by the Germans out of non-strategic materials. So this airplane was built out of wood, and it was probably one of the most frightening airplanes I've ever flown. There's a condition called an equilibrium. You put it up to a certain angle of attack, and it's called a stall, of course, in an airplane. It will drop off one side or the other. Well, this airplane wouldn't drop off. It would fall straight down just like this. They had put an ejection seat in it because the inlet was right here behind you. They felt the pilot could not get out because he gets sucked into the engine. I never had to use the seat, but I thought I was going to have to. The airplane was coming straight down. Normally you pull the throttle to idle, hoping the nose will drop. It didn't, so I decided I'd go into full power. I had some perceptible change in this attitude, and I thought, if I've got the guts to stay in it, when I get into the dense air below 5,000 feet, the power will be enough to get the airplane out of this nose-high attitude. I would guess that I got out probably 500 feet or so above the ground.
If you get down to the basics of real test flying, and that is determining the stability and control and safety of an airplane, test flying is done very much like it was back in the 40s and 50s. And yes, we use flight test cards, and we call them test cards. We number them and we put test maneuvers on them. And we put only the data that the pilot needs to know in order to fly the card properly. And then the engineers, of course, use that to make sure that the pilot does the maneuvers that they want him to do and to get the data that's needed.
But when you're starting to develop a brand new style of airplane, we call it the jet age, and we're going into the unknown of compressibility and supersonic flight, is something that we didn't know anything about. And there wasn't somebody writing miles and miles of lines of code and all kinds of computer analysis to determine what's going to happen. They went out and they did it by the seat of their pants. They were really punching into the unknown.
He could tell in his gut and in his hands what the airplane was doing. He could tell very quickly whether you've got a safe airplane, whether you've got an airplane that's going to have dangerous faults. And a test pilot's that feeling, he directs, he communicates that, and he ends up directing the rest of the test program.
Today we get on airliners that have all these aerodynamic features that we take for granted. Each one of those things had to be discovered, and many of those discoveries cost lives. When these test pilots like Bob Hoover and others went out and flew an airplane, they did not know what was going to happen when they tried something. At some point the airplane was going to reach its limit, and whoever was flying it at that time had better be ready for it.
So the next clip is actually on the X1, but I want to keep this tight and because I want to do Q&A, but I'll just tell you that there is a section also on the X1. How many of you know his involvement with the X1, or whether he was involved or not? Bob Hoover was a participant in the X1 program. He was actually Yeager's, he flew the chase plane, it was a P-80, and would help orient him and help land him. There's a neat section, I'm not going to give it away if you do see the film, but you know, Bob actually left the Air Force in 1947, so he was there for about 2 years at Wright-Patt, flying all of these different aircraft. And you know, he was doing a lot of compressibility testing. He was actually doing a lot of the testing leading up to breaking the speed of sound. And of course, he buzzed the tower upside down and got demoted. And But you'll have to see the film to see the details on that. So I'll leave that as a little teaser there. But one of the ones I didn't want to leave out, because any of you work at North American Aviation? Anyone? Whenever I play in Southern California, I always find at least that we had a screening at the Palm Springs Museum, and there were a number of people who raised their hand on that. And so I just didn't want to miss showing you this clip. He found his home for many, many years after his time at Wright-Patt. He actually went to Allison Division first, and that didn't work out for various reasons, and he ended up teaching for a moment, actually, in Tennessee at college for about a nanosecond. He went there to actually be a student because he had never gotten his college degree, and when he got there, they said, "Hey, we don't have an aerospace department. How'd you like to be a professor?" So anyhow, very shortly after this time, he ended up at North American Aviation, and that's probably one of my favorite segments of the film, so I look forward to sharing that with you.
One company, and that was North American Aviation, had built the best airplanes I had ever flown. And when they called me, I decided I would learn every facet of that company. I could see downstream, what if I couldn't fly? I better be prepared to do something else. So when they hired me, and I went in to meet the president of the company and one of the founders, he said, "What are your ambitions?" I said, "Eventually, I want to be sitting in your chair." There were 6 of us in experimental. And as we would lose a pilot, well, they'd hire somebody else to come in and fill those shoes. The losses were pretty high. Not as bad as combat, but you stick your hand in the fire often enough, you could get it burned. The first years involved flying the F-86. Every change that's made, you have to go test it all over again. And then the F-100, and then the OV-10, the FJ2, I made the first flight on it, and also the Navy version of the T-28, the Sableliner, and one of the first of the smaller business jets. With each promotion, Dutch assured me that as long as he was running the company, that I could stay in the cockpit and handle dual responsibilities. And he kept throwing them at me, and I managed to luck out and surround myself with the right people, and all of my dreams came true. I learned an immense amount of things that I had not known before. I sat in on all of the top meetings having to do with confidential designs. It was an opportunity to really learn a lot more than I'd ever learned before. Our company designed the rocket motors that powered us to space, to the moon. The space division had the opportunity of building the Apollo 13, all of the Apollos that went to the moon. So we had the power plants and we had the vehicle that went to the moon.
Well, Bob was at North American for a long time, and the history of North American's airplane was they built this P-51 fighter, which was essentially the best fighter of the war. They built the F-86, which was the best fighter of that Korean of any time. And then they built this F-100, which was to be the follow-on F-86 to the F-86. So his contributions to that were really material. And the fact that the ejection seat worked is demonstrated by me sitting in this chair talking to you. So we've made a lot of great progress, and Bob's always been on the leading edge of that stuff.
Neat thing about a test pilot is he has a very unique responsibility, because what he does and how he develops and tests the airplane, knowing in the back of your mind that that airplane is going to be operated with people that are not as experienced. It's going into the normal world, the normal squadrons. And when that airplane goes into combat, is there a flaw?
So, as the safety plane for the Reno air races for, I don't know, 40 years or so, Bob actually eventually was awarded by Lloyd's of London an award. I think they've only given it once, for being the most insurable pilot in the world. And so you look at this collection of experiences. This is like this is maybe a little over an eighth of the content of the film. You know, I wanted to give you guys a good bite of it. You know, basically throughout the film you get why that might have, I mean, of course if you had seen him fly, but very unique skill set, unique individual, a man who cares about the future of aviation. He cares about keeping the pipeline full of young aviators. He cares about aviators all over the world and truly loves them. I've seen time and time again Bob at different events. I had the privilege of traveling with him over the course of making this film. You know, I attended the F-86 convention and the F-100 conventions, and you know, probably about the finest group of individuals you can find in a room. I find myself similarly moved whenever I stand with aviators such as yourself and say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's something that Bob believes in, and he believes in promoting aviation, he believes in our country, and he believes in the future of aviation. And so this film, and my goal with this film was to take a little bit of that and try to preserve it in an evergreen way for future generations so they can understand what this man named Bob Hoover has been and what he does mean to us, and always will. So how are we doing for time? Okay. We're okay. I have one more clip. Do you guys want to see one more clip and then we'll do a Q&A?
Yes.
Okay, great, terrific. So, so talking about that future of aviation, and you know what all of us are concerned about in aviation is just keeping that pipeline full of aviators. I have this neat last clip, and then we'll do a little Q&A.
To say if another Bob Hoover come along, I don't think so. Because it's all different now. There's so many more regulations, let's say, and things that most pilots aren't taking the freedom they have. They come up in a book of regulations that they don't know, or they're not really aware that the plane will still fly if they go off the beaten path. And Bob was always off the beaten path.
Most of his peers are now, you know, they're written in history books, but most of them are gone. And, you know, when the time comes and we're all going to go, as my granddaughter says, up there someday, Poppy, he will be somewhat of the last of his breed. But he will left his mark in history. He will left a challenge for those who follow in his footsteps, and he will be part of the legacy of the Wright brothers that will, I believe, continue forever.
Now we're looking at things like anti-gravity, nanotechnology, and the things that, with my limited education, I don't understand, but I would say that we're just moving into the most interesting part of probably aviation that we lived through. Although it's been very exciting for the last 100 years, the next 25 years are going to be a very exciting time for aviation.
Breakthroughs are out there, lots of them are out there. We don't know what they are because they are breakthroughs. They probably don't even seem sensible now. Usually, before a breakthrough is recognized as being a breakthrough, it's considered nonsense. So someone has to have confidence in nonsense if he's going to be in a position to do a breakthrough.
Bob took a basic business aircraft and flew it to the performance edges. Now, doing that with a stock business aircraft is different because they're just regular engines that have not been improved for aerobatics. Bob's plane is configured in a feathered condition. If you're flying along and you have an engine problem, you want to feather the props so that they're not creating a drag on the airplane. And then you can maneuver the aircraft much more easily to get it down in an emergency situation. What we wanted to do was show it in that famous configuration of his. When he does the last turn, the 180-degree turn to final, he lands on one wheel, brings the aircraft up, lands on another wheel, and then still rolls the plane to Air Show Center with no engines and with the props feathered. And that's the configuration we wanted to show that people come away with. Say, that's how I see the airplane when he finishes his routine.
Dreams come true here in America. We have more freedoms to fly than anywhere else in the world. We just got to figure out a way how to get it to that next generation.
Well, the benefits, that have accrued to this country from aviation from wartime and peacetime are just not well understood anymore. Military aviation, civil aviation, commercial guys, little private pilots, if we don't all work together, we're going to lose it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a camaraderie, Harrison, among aviators all over the world. That's what all of us as aviators have enjoyed so much. It's part of our good life, and it is a good life because I've not met very many people who were flying that I didn't immediately like.
I was dancing with my darling to the Tennessee waltz when an old friend I happened.
Okay, so that's the actual end of the film, and that's my presentation. So thank you so very, very much. Now, we are going to do a quick Q&A, and then I have, of course, because I'm the producer of this film as well as the creative, but if any of you are interested in purchasing DVDs, we do have them here. I have them on DVD and Blu-ray. They're great gifts. They're great Father's Day gifts. They're great Christmas gifts. They're great gifts all the time. And anyway, we are also releasing in theaters soon, which is great. Our first AMC theater screening is in San Diego, coming up in a month or so. These cards that are on your table, they actually have our website on the back. If you go to the bobhooverproject.com, you can see all of our screening dates. We're showing upcoming screenings. We're going to be at the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. We'll be doing a full screening there. Bob will actually be there at that one. That is in Orange County. So if any of you would like to see the full film, it's free. I think they're providing refreshments. There might be a couple kegs of beer there, I don't know. It is the test pilots, so we're very excited to be there with them. And then there's many, many, many other screenings coming up. And you can arrange a screening as well if you want to bring it to your local AMC. And if you do, let me know, because I can let you know how you can help us spread the word of Bob's story. So that's my commercial. And now, does anyone have any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
You can sell me anything.
Thank you.
Have you talked to the Camelot Theater about showing it here in Palm Springs, the Camelot Theater?
I haven't, but I was just speaking to someone earlier who was speaking to me about bringing it to Palm Springs. Red shirt. He's actually left the room. But there you are. So someone else who was talking about bringing it to Palm Springs. Bringing it to a movie theater in Palm Springs is a great idea. There are certain theaters, I know it's AMC, Landmark, and Regency. All three of them, if you go on the site, there's a host a screening. And if you click on that and you enter in your information, I believe there's a pull down that shows you what movie theaters in your area will show it. And then it's just, you buy your ticket and you tell all your friends to buy their tickets, and that's how you host your screening. So I think there's a limit, there's a minimum that you have to meet, like at least X number of people buy their tickets. And then that's how you bring it to a movie theater. So, but I'll look into Camelot Theater if you want to. I can help you further with that. We have a gal named Liz who she's a coordinator, and she's She'll help you make your, if you have a place where you want to screen this movie to all your friends, let us know, we'll make it successful for you. We literally have someone who will help make it happen. Yes, sir.
Is there anything in the film about when he was blacklisted by the FAA and not allowed to fly an air show?
So that's a great question. The question was, is there anything in the film about when he was, when his ticket was pulled by the FAA and he was not allowed to fly? Very suddenly, when he was 70 years old, there were a couple guys in Oklahoma who pulled his ticket on medical reasons. So I recorded all that material. I could tell that story. And I think what I ran into was, and what I should have said about that 12 and a half hours, Bob is a very good storyteller. That was not because Bob was telling extraneous stories. That was because Bob has so many stories that it was a real challenge to get Bob's life and all of his experiences into a 90-minute film. And when I started structuring it, I realized that that episode, for any of you who don't know, Bob had his license pulled while he was a bit in the peak of his career. He was 70, the airline pilots were stopping flying at that time at 60. And it's like, hey, there were a couple bad apples in the FAA, and they said, hey, I think it's time for Hoover to stop flying. So there was a whole, I hear some, yes. So we could tell that story. It's a common point of pain that some other people have experienced maybe over time. And I ran into the issue of, to really tell that story right would have taken a whole other film. Because you can't tell it quickly, because then it was a little complicated. There were different things at play. I could have alluded to it, and I'll spoiler it right now. I'll tell you, if you go looking for that story, it's not in there. And it was a choice. Bob and I talked about it, and my gut was that I wanted to do it right if I told it, and there just wasn't, if I would have had to leave out Reno or leave out something else he had done. If I did it quickly, it wouldn't have done it justice, and Bob decided he didn't want it in there. And I think it's right. When you see the film, I'd be interested in your take, but the film talks about his flying and everything he did accomplish, and because it was such a black mark on, I think it was such a, it's a tellable story, but it's a different documentary than what we made. We made a film celebrating his career, and so we just left that out. We just decided it wasn't part of it. So someone should tell that story at some point. And I had found the Australian medical examiner who had helped him fly in Australia. We had interviewed him, wonderful interview. So there's content to support it, and I think, at some point, who knows, maybe we'll have a special feature that just focuses on that. But right now it's not in the film. But it's a great question.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Yes. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Wasn't there a rumor that he got killed at the air show at Reno one year?
Wow, that's interesting. I'm always hearing something new. He said, wasn't there a rumor that he got killed at an air show at Reno one year? I don't know about that. Does anyone know about it? Yeah, I don't know. Could have been. I mean, he would do something. There was a ravine. I'm not the right one to tell this. Someone may know this better than I do, but at Reno, isn't there like a ravine? There's some way that you can kind of duck down, and there's like a rocky ravine. I know that he's sometimes ducked out of view when he does a show and just kind of, popped up, and people were concerned that maybe he had disappeared, but it was just his showmanship. But no, I hadn't heard that one. I hadn't heard it. Yes, sir.
Is his story of flying the Russian Yak in the film?
That is one of my favorite stories. So, flying the Russian Yak, that's a long story too. Now that's a short film, and did you see the photo of him with the aerobatic team in Russia in 1966? That was from that event when he was over there in Russia, and great story. I mean, it's in his book in great detail. Where it starts is, there was the Yak, and they basically, it was the Russians versus the Americans, and then Bob had an opportunity to fly it. He wrung it out, and then the Russians all kind of came in, and they were very excited, and the Russian government didn't like it very much because he kind of showed up their pilots, and he was close to being thrown in a Russian jail when Yuri Gagarin kind of saw him and said hello, and kind of brought him into this. I mean, it's an unbelievable, it's a film. that story is a whole film in and of itself, because what were they there to do? And apparently they were there to identify the U-2 and Red Square, and their rooms were bugged, and it was all, I mean, it's a neat story, but that particular story is not in the film. Now, I could sound like a person who's like, well, that story's not in the film. I mean, like I said, I have a 12.5-hour interview, and it's full of great stories. It's full of, this is a man who, if he had done less, it would have been easier to make his movie. And it really was, So what we're planning on doing, and I've talked to Bob about this, is I said, Bob, all this can't end up on the cutting room floor. So what I'm planning is, we have started working on, for Christmas, a second DVD, like a companion piece that has all the additional stories that we didn't put in the film. And they'll just be named by the story, and it will be, the Russian yak, or and it will be yada, yada, yada. So we'll just get Bob and his stories. Just how many people would be interested in that? Yeah. So this is, we may not even illustrate it. We may just have Bob just sit there and just tell his stories. Because to make a 12-hour movie would be kind of prohibitive. And you can't illustrate one and then not illustrate another, so that's what we're planning. So thank you for asking. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
You have DVDs present.
We do. So this will be the last question, because it's a nice segue into, I guess I'll be set up. Where would you guys like me to set up to do this? I could do it at this head table, or if there's a table right there. There's a table in the back. I'll be back there. I've got a little card swiper that we can, take your card and you can buy a Blu-ray or a DVD, and we'd be honored for you to take as many of these. If you've got, a flying club or, a FBO or someplace you want to bring these postcards, we've got plenty of them. Take as many as you like. I don't need to drive them back to Los Angeles, so take some of these postcards if you wouldn't mind. And thank you all. It's been an incredible honor to stand in front of you and to share my film with you, and thank you so much for your time and attention.